un techo desconocido, una habitación desconocida, sábanas desconocidas e incluso dolor. Su cuerpo le duele como si lo hubieran golpeado. Recuerda todo hasta unos cócteles en la fiesta de bienvenida. Senju tiene 20 años y ha vivido una vida agitada. La espalda que ahora ve es la de Mujin. Desearía que todo resultara ser un sueño, no puede entender por qué terminó a solas con Mujin. Han sido vecinos desde que tiene memoria, es el hermano mayor de su amigo Mirhan y un viejo conocido de su difunta hermana. Mujin tiene una personalidad astuta, que a menudo le valía regaños de la hermana de Senju, y también es 10 años mayor que Senju. Debido a las bromas y burlas constantes, Senju trató de evitar a Mujin. Durante su adolescencia no puede comprender cómo las cosas escalaron, hasta el punto de estar juntos. Ahora Senju se pregunta si está soñando, y decide volver a dormir. De repente Mujin le pregunta si está despierto. Mujin menciona que habló con Murhan, dice que Murhan los invitó a cenar a casa de sus padres. Senju se da cuenta de que Mujin sostiene su teléfono, que muestra numerosas llamadas perdidas de Murhan. Se levanta y pregunta cómo Mujin pudo tocar las pertenencias de otra persona, incluso si se hubiera despertado en la calle. No habría sido tan mortificante como esto. No, incluso si se hubiera despertado en casa de un extraño que conoció ayer, no se compararía con despertar en la cama del hermano mayor de su amigo, no podría ser peor. Mujin le pregunta si recuerda algo. Por si fuera poco, Mujin resulta ser de quien Senju ha estado enamorado en secreto y de forma no correspondida. Han pasado 3 meses desde el cumpleaños 20 de Senju. Sí, esto sucedió exactamente 3 meses después, alguien incendió la montaña y huyó con la víctima. La ira de los cielos debe ser apaciguada. Una enfermedad, fantasma atacará a cualquiera que cometa un acto tan atroz. Así la familia So fue maldecida y las generaciones futuras fueron atormentadas por espíritus malévolos debido al pecado de quemar la naturaleza. Los cielos le dieron la espalda a la chica de los So, linaje, y su árbol genealógico comenzó a marchitarse si fuera necesario. Ella se sacrificaría para protegerla de los fantasmas. La promesa de una amiga cercana se convirtió en su consuelo. La dama Kim, dotada con la habilidad de ver los fantasmas que atormentaban a su amiga, hizo construir una casa idéntica al otro lado de la calle como señuelo, usando su don para expulsar espíritus malignos. Protegió a su amiga hasta el final de sus días. Incluso después de su muerte, su legado y voluntad se transmitieron de generación en generación, y hasta el día de hoy las dos familias viven una al lado de la otra. Senju conoce a la familia de enfrente desde hace 20 años, y si algo ha aprendido es que la ignorancia es felicidad. A veces es mejor permanecer en la ignorancia. ¿Cómo terminó aquí? ¿Qué pasó anoche? ¿Por qué le duele la espalda? Quizás es mejor no saber. Dice que podría irse. Mujin le dice que deberían desayunar primero. Dice que le comprará algo delicioso a Senju, insistiendo en que necesita comer más. Desafortunadamente, la ignorancia no puede durar para siempre. Mujin lleva a Senju, y Senju se lo agradece. Diciendo que ya se va, también le agradece a Mujin por la comida mientras se despiden. Mujin le dice que no beba demasiado esta noche. Senju se pregunta, ¿cómo sabe Mujin que planeaba beber también esta noche? Mujin le recuerda que lo mencionó ayer. Senju piensa qué tonto debió ser para decir eso, y le asegura a Mujin que no bebe tanto. Todos los días, Senju reflexiona sobre lo fácil que puede decir tonterías, pero le cuesta evitar estropearlo todo. Se siente inquieto de alguna manera. Cuando toca el pomo de la puerta, siente como si algo extraño hubiera más allá. Al entrar al patio, todo parece igual. Se pregunta, ¿qué pudo haber sido? Decide que debe haber sido su imaginación. Mirhan piensa que Mujin debió avisar a sus padres. Ya que no le dijeron nada, normalmente sus padres se preocupan con y sin motivo. Mujin lo sabe, y debe habérselo explicado todo. Senju se había estado preguntando qué había pasado, para que Mujin contestara desde su teléfono, la maldita familia. So es conocida, porque sus descendientes rara vez superan los 20 años, debido a los ataques de espíritus malignos. Sin embargo, como Senju nació en un día propicio, logró evitar ese destino. Por esa razón, sus padres y vecinos siempre estaban en vilo. Siempre le pasaba algo a Senju. Temía que esta vez pudieran haber denunciado su desaparición. Mirhan le pregunta cómo pudo beber tanto. Perdió el conocimiento, diciéndole que necesita conocer sus límites, ya que claramente no aguanta el alcohol. Senju responde que no bebe así todos los días. Mirhan le pregunta si los visitará hoy. Senju dice que tiene una reunión con sus compañeros y que probablemente volverá tarde. Mirhan menciona que su perro Peksulgi siempre lo está esperando. Le pregunta cómo supo su hermano que tenía que recogerlo. Senju dice que no sabe, y Murhan se pregunta por qué no le preguntó. Senju pregunta por qué debería hacerlo, diciendo que al final todo salió bien. No está seguro de querer ahondar en los detalles de anoche. Dice que tiene que irse y cuelga Senju. piensa en la suerte que tiene, de que Murhan nunca haga demasiadas preguntas. Senju se despide del ama de llaves, y piensa que si él no saca el tema de la noche anterior, Mujin probablemente tampoco lo mencionará. Resuelve llevarse este secreto a la tumba en una reunión con amigos. Senju no puede dejar de pensar en anoche. Un amigo le pregunta por qué parece tan triste, y Senju responde que está bien. El amigo dice que es obvio que no está bien, señalando que ha estado suspirando toda la noche. El amigo le insiste en que lo comparta, diciendo que no puede ayudar si no sabe qué le pasa. Senju recuerda despertarse en la cama del hermano mayor de su amigo esta mañana, y recuerda haber llorado mucho anoche. Admite que bebió tanto que perdió el conocimiento. El amigo le pregunta si llegó bien a casa, y se pregunta qué pudo salir mal. Senju dice que hizo el ridículo de camino a casa. El amigo dice que tiene curiosidad por saber cómo. Senju dice que se avergonzó delante de un viejo conocido, pero no recuerda los detalles. Piensa que estrictamente hablando, no fue del todo culpa suya en situaciones así, ambos tienen la culpa. Después de todo, Mujin vio que estaba borracho, y aún así, de repente llega So-Jon, disculpándose por la tardanza, y pregunta por qué Senju parece moribundo. Senju explica que bebió tanto, que perdió el conocimiento y se puso en ridículo. So-Yeon le dice que si hay un momento para cometer errores, es ahora que tiene 20 años. Le aconseja que no se preocupe y sugiere comer algo de carne en su lugar. Senju piensa que no estaría tan preocupado. Si esto fuera solo cosa de una vez, el 1 de enero, cuando acababa de cumplir 20, tuvo su primer beso borracho. No fue un beso infantil. Llevaba todos sus sentimientos genuinos y ahora ha vuelto a ocurrir. Sus amigos le preguntan si quiere unirse, pero Senju les dice que beban solos. So-Jon sube a un taxi y se despide hasta el lunes. Los chicos le dicen que tenga cuidado de camino a casa. El amigo de Senju sugiere que vayan a por la tercera ronda. Senju pregunta ¿para qué necesitaría una tercera? Y dice que es hora de ir a casa. Senju empuja a su amigo a un coche y le dice que no saque la cabeza. Y le indica al conductor que arranque. El amigo dice que esperará una llamada si Senju cambia de opinión. Senju se pregunta qué clase de día ha sido. Tuvo que llamar a casa para avisar que salía a caminar. El ambiente exterior es oscuro, casi como si un fantasma pudiera aparecer, aunque sabe que no vería. Uno carece de poder espiritual. De repente se da cuenta de una chica extraña, con el pelo negro, descalza y vestida de blanco. Senju siente un miedo creciente. Piensa que solo necesita dormir un poco. Su mente le está jugando una mala pasada. Quiere apurarse y acostarse lo más rápido posible. La chica sigue caminando a su lado, corre hacia la carretera frente a un autobús, y Senju intenta detenerla. Se abalanza a la carretera para salvarla, y mirando el autobús que se acerca a toda velocidad, se pregunta si así es como morirá. Pero de repente, alguien lo aparta. Mujin lo sostiene en sus brazos, y comenta que ahora entiende por qué tenía un mal presentimiento en ese momento. Senju solo pudo esbozar una sonrisa nerviosa, ya fuera por el abrazo desconocido, o por el temblor que sacudía su cuerpo debilitado. No sabría decirlo. La chica sigue de pie, en medio de la carretera. Al día siguiente, Senju va a la universidad, se da cuenta de que cayó bajo la influencia de un espíritu, intenta ignorar los eventos de ayer, pero es difícil olvidar un encuentro con un fantasma. Siempre pensó que pasaría toda su vida sin experimentar algo así. Pero quizás su linaje lo ha alcanzado. Saca de su bolsillo un talismán que le dio Murhan desde que pasó la noche con Mujin. Ha sentido una energía extraña y sospecha que se enfrenta a problemas serios de repente. So-Hwan se le acerca y le pregunta por qué está absorto en sus pensamientos. Senju le dice que lo asustó. So-Hwan responde que él también la asustó, y pregunta si se ha metido en problemas otra vez. Senju le dice que no diga tonterías y que solo está un poco cansado. Le pregunta si llegó a casa sin problemas el sábado. Ese sábado, Mujin mencionó que Senju podría haber desarrollado visión espiritual. La visión espiritual, la habilidad de ver espíritus, es un don extremadamente raro entre la gente común. Es asombroso que se manifestara precisamente en él, si uno nace en un día propicio, pero carece de una sola gota de energía espiritual. No hay forma de que pudieran ver espíritus, o al menos eso es lo que él solía creer. Mujin explicó qué sucedió. Porque su energía espiritual fue transferida a Senju en ese momento. Mujin tranquilizó a Senju, diciéndole que todo estaba bien. Aunque todavía se sentía inquieto, los susurros tranquilos de Mujin le ayudaron a recuperar la compostura. No porque la presencia de Mujin fuera tranquilizadora, sino porque su voz baja y sensual tenía un matiz sugerente, que era imposible de ignorar. Mujin le dijo que no se preocupara y que solo era temporal. Normalmente se desvanece en mediodía. Sin embargo, añadió que en el caso de Senju podría tardar un poco más. Le aseguró que asumiría toda la responsabilidad. Senju preguntó de qué tipo de responsabilidad estaba hablando. Muhin respondió que si no podía recuperar su energía espiritual de Senju, tendría que protegerlo. Hasta que su visión espiritual desapareciera, explicó que no querían que se metiera en problemas de nuevo. Muhin se acercó al espíritu y Senju le preguntó qué estaba haciendo. Notó talismanes en las manos de Muhin y se preguntó si estaba a punto de exorcizar al espíritu. El talismán comenzó a brillar en las manos de Muhin. Senju estaba completamente asombrado. Nunca antes había visto algo así. Muhin le dijo que cerrara los ojos y contara hasta 100. Senju se preguntó si Muhin todavía lo consideraba un niño. En el pesado y opresivo silencio, todos sus sentidos se agudizaron a pesar del tono autoritario. Senju decidió mantener los ojos cerrados hasta que Muhin dijera que había terminado, entendiendo que la instrucción no se había dado a la ligera. En realidad no quería saber qué se estaba desarrollando ante él. Escuchó un sonido como de puertas abriéndose. ¿Pero dónde podrían aparecer? Unas puertas en medio de la calle. De repente aparecieron 2 espíritus misteriosos, y Muhin los saludó diciendo que había pasado un tiempo para Senju. Todo parecía surrealista. Se preguntó cuándo terminaría finalmente, y se sintió profundamente perturbado por todo el aire. Se volvió más frío. Los 2 espíritus y la chica desaparecieron en la niebla. Muhin le preguntó si había tenido mucho miedo. Senju miró a su alrededor y no vio nada. Ni chica, ni puertas, nada de nada. Muhin preguntó si había algún problema. Senju respondió que todo estaba bien. Muhin le dijo que fuera con él, diciendo que lo llevaría a Senju. Preguntó a qué se refería antes. Cuando dijo que se haría responsable, preguntó, ¿qué pasaría si apareciera otro espíritu y tuvieran que realizar otro ritual? Pensó que encontrarse con un espíritu no había sido la experiencia más agradable. Muhin explicó que los espíritus no eran en realidad tan raros. Le preguntó si Senju tenía miedo. Senju dijo que no, solo que era agotador y prolongado. Muhin le dijo que no se preocupara tanto y prometió intentar no aparecer frente a él. Muy a menudo, Senju pensó en lo seguro que era Muhin. Recordó cómo Murhan, debido a su propio don, solía perder el sueño de niño. Sin embargo, incluso entre su familia, Muhin destacaba. Muhin reveló que era un exorcista. De hecho, era un cazador de fantasmas, capaz de desterrar almas en pena. A los 20, se convirtió en miembro oficial de la Asociación de Exorcistas, y había estado cazando espíritus. Desde entonces, durante los últimos 10 años, Muhin había viajado por todo el país. Le preguntó a Senju si sabía que los espíritus se sentían atraídos por la energía espiritual, explicando que los espíritus malignos, a veces, parasitan a los seres vivos o enloquecidos, los atacan, incluso las almas en pena, conservan un fragmento de su mente, y la energía espiritual de los exorcistas los repele. Por eso Muhin dijo que se quedaría al lado de Senju para que ningún espíritu pudiera acercársele, a menos que quisiera ser expulsado de este mundo. Senju preguntó si eso significaba que podría no volver a encontrarse con ningún espíritu. Muhin dijo que era muy probable. Senju se dio cuenta de que Muhin no estaba del todo seguro, nunca daba garantías. Cuando había la más mínima posibilidad, lo que significaba que Senju podría encontrarse con otro espíritu de nuevo, Muhin lo tranquilizó, prometiendo que nada le haría daño, y pidiéndole que no se preocupara demasiado por ello. Desde la infancia, todos alrededor de Senju habían sido demasiado protectores con él. Aunque estaba acostumbrado, el cuidado excesivo a veces podía ser irritante. Se preguntó si Muhin estaba haciendo esto por una promesa familiar, un sentido del deber, o muy probablemente por culpa. De repente Muhin besó a Senju. Senju exclamó, preguntando qué clase de comportamiento asqueroso era ese. Muhin respondió que estaba siendo bastante grosero de la nada. Muhin preguntó si Senju había aprendido a usar un encendedor. Senju se preguntó por qué siquiera preguntaba. Muhin dijo que esperaba que siempre fuera así de ahora en adelante. Senju se preguntó si Muhin estaba bromeando con él de nuevo. Muhin le dijo que se fuera a casa, diciendo que lo recogería el lunes después de su conversación. Senju finalmente se dio cuenta de lo que le había pesado. Cuando las puertas se abrieron, había sido el talismán que suprimía la energía espiritual. El frío que había sentido provenía de la energía de Mirjan. Esta revelación le hizo darse cuenta de cuántas cosas había sido parte sin saberlo, cosas de las que de otro modo nunca se habría enterado. Sus amigos le preguntaron si Senju de verdad no quería beber con ellos, y sugirieron salir a cenar. Senju dijo que no iría. Le dijeron que ellos invitaban, y que ni siquiera tendría que pagar. Senju se negó de nuevo pidiéndoles que fueran sin él, ya que estaba esperando a alguien. Sugirieron comer mariscos, esta vez diciendo que conocían un lugar genial. Senju pensó que ni siquiera lo estaban escuchando, y se preguntó por qué incluso los que no bebían parecían tan emocionados. Senju le pidió a su amigo que no se apoyara en él, diciendo que apestaba a cigarrillos. Su amigo lo abrazó y le dijo que dejara de decir esas cosas. Senju pensó en cómo con Mujin, aún por llegar, no podía imaginar cómo deshacerse de ellos. De repente escuchó a unas chicas hablar de un chico guapo. Se preguntó si sería Mujin, pero recordó que Mujin había dicho que esperaría en la puerta principal. Seguramente había otras personas atractivas en el mundo. Esperaba desesperadamente que no fuera él. Senju siempre había sentido que atraía la atención de forma extraña, no por su apariencia, sino por la atmósfera única que creaba. Con su presencia, se preguntó cómo podría acercarse a Mujin, con todo el mundo mirando. Si pudiera se daría la vuelta y correría. No era tanto por vergüenza, como por el hecho de saber que cada vez que los veían juntos, causaba un alboroto no solo para él, sino también para Murhan y Muhan. Las llamativas apariencias del trío y su historia como vecinos habían impactado significativamente su vida diaria. Cada vez que pensaba en ello, su deseo de mostrar cualquier familiaridad con ellos desaparecía. Tal vez debería irse en silencio. El amigo de Senju le preguntó por qué se movía tan lento, diciendo que su mesa ya estaba reservada y amenazando con adelantarse y pedir sin él. De repente, las miradas de Senju y Mujin se encontraron y se saludaron. Su amigo preguntó si se conocían. Y si esta era la persona frente a la que hizo el ridículo la última vez. Senju dijo que Mujin era solo un conocido. Senju le dijo a su amigo que se callara. Mujin los vio discutir y se rió. Senju pensó que esto era un desastre absoluto. Se despidió de sus amigos y se acercó a Mujin. Mujin le preguntó si no pensaba ir a algún sitio con sus amigos. Senju le dijo que no esperara junto a la universidad la próxima vez, y que él lo llamaría en su lugar. Senju explicó que era porque no quería quitarle el precioso tiempo a Mujin. Pensó que Mujin no lo esperaría si quería salir con sus amigos. Mujin dijo que siempre haría tiempo para recogerlo, pero Senju respondió que debería usar ese tiempo para pasear a Pexolgi. Mujin comentó que de todos modos no debería esperar más en la puerta principal. Senju le dijo que no esperaba atención de alguien tan ocupado que solo visitaba a sus padres 3 veces al año. De repente, Mujin preguntó si Senju de verdad lo consideraba solo un conocido. Senju preguntó cómo más debería llamarlo. Mujin sugirió llamarlo un vecino cercano. Jeon preguntó si eso no era exacto. Senju pensó que no era exacto en absoluto. Ya ni siquiera vivía en la casa de al lado. Le dijo a Mujin que no eran tan cercanos. Mujin dijo que era una lástima escuchar eso, considerando que solía cambiarle los pañales a Senju. Senju preguntó por qué sacaba a relucir algo que ni siquiera podía recordar. Mujin se acercó y preguntó si Senju todavía lo consideraba solo un conocido. Después de escuchar esas palabras, Senju habría preferido que siguieran siendo extraños. Lo que más le irritaba era cómo seguía reaccionando a las palabras de Mujin, sabiendo que estaba bromeando. Mujin preguntó si el fumador era su mejor amigo, señalando que apestaba a cigarrillos. Senju se preguntó cómo Mujin podía oler el humo desde el otro lado de la calle, y le preguntó si era siquiera humano. Mujin le dijo que no pareciera tan sorprendido, y le preguntó si era amigo de todos esos chicos y chicas. Senju dijo que solo eran compañeros de clase. Mujin bromeó diciendo que desde que lo habían enviado a la universidad, las chicas se habían arremolinado a su alrededor. Senju le pidió que dejara de actuar como su padre. Senju caminó rápidamente hacia adelante, pero Mujin le dijo que fuera más despacio, recordándole que se suponía que debían caminar uno al lado del otro. Senju pensó que si ese fuera el caso, Mujin no debería haber dicho tantas tonterías. Mujin asked if he planned to walk alone. Senju wondered how many more days this would continue once his spiritual vision closed. He'd no longer have the chance to walk alongside Mujin. Mujin would return to hunting spirits, and Senju would go back to his dull routine. The most overwhelming sense of loneliness can only arise from loving someone who does not return that love. In the end, he grew accustomed to his absence and gave up. He feels that something is off today. As he looks at the familiar scenery, he senses a certain oppressive unease. A sweet aroma drifts by. Is it coming from the forest? In an instant, the thick fragrance overwhelms him, and he feels an urge to rush toward it. His consciousness begins to drift slowly. He feels compelled to follow it into the forest. Mujin calls his name, but for a moment, Senju forgets his own name. Mujin asks what's wrong, pointing out that he suddenly froze in place. Senju wonders what that was. While Mujin asks if he's in any pain, Senju says everything is fine. He just caught a scent for a moment. He felt as though he had lost control. He thinks maybe it was just his imagination, if something were truly wrong. Mujin, as an exorcist, would have noticed first. He tells himself, it doesn't matter and isn't worth worrying about. He tells Mujin, it was probably nothing, and suggests they keep going. He concludes that he's just tired and really needs some sleep. Mujin asks if he's embarrassed to be around him. Senju explains that acquaintances keep pestering him to introduce them to Mujin. Mujin asks why he doesn't just introduce them. Senju asks if he's joking, adding that they're only 20 years old. Muhin replies that yes, perhaps 20 is too young. He then asks Senju if he'd like some cake today. They follow the same path as before. As they approach the mountain trail, the oppressive feeling returns, and he fears the strange scent might reappear. He's carried a talisman with him for over 2 years, but this is the first time he's relied on it so desperately. The closer they get to the trail, the stronger the sweet aroma becomes. He resolves not to fall for it again. That would definitely be cause for concern. And if Muhin truly starts to worry, he might begin waiting outside Senju's lecture hall instead of at the main gate, which would cause his friends to pester him all over again. He recalls Muhin saying that 20 is too young. Suddenly Senju realizes he doesn't know where he is, why, where, and for what reason is he walking. Suddenly he sees a strange boar in the forest. For the first time, he distinctly feels the curse he's managed to escape until now creeping up on him. This time he truly might lose his life. Muhin suddenly appears with a talisman in hand. Muhin tells him he's clever and reassures him that he's here. He tells Senju everything is fine and instructs him to simply close his eyes and count to 100. Spirits are the embodiment of nature itself, giving life to various creatures. A soul without a vessel, one that has not found peace or healing, is capable of accumulating anger and absorbing negative emotions, eventually harming other beings. Lost souls that remain stuck in this world for too long gradually lose their minds, their ability to think, and even their memories. When their reason fully abandons them, they become malevolent spirits. The energy of spirits accelerates this process. However, alongside the harmful entities, there are those capable of saving them. People who protect the living from interference by the other world are called exorcists. Their duty is to eradicate evil spirits. Among exorcists, some track spirits, while others seal them. Muhin belongs to the latter group of exorcists. Muhin carried an unconscious Senju home. Muhin simply told him to trust him. Senju found the insistence so compelling that he almost nodded in agreement. He asked Muhin if he was implying that he might encounter another spirit. Muhin said it was possible. Senju pointed out that Muhin had already sealed it. Muhin clarified that he had only sealed the boar. Senju wondered if that wasn't the end of it and worried there might be other spirits in the area. He hoped there weren't. Muhin remarked that it seemed he had confused Senju. He admitted he couldn't be certain, but suggested drawing an analogy. Senju was like a flower without a scent, but so valuable that everyone wanted to reach it. And if Senju was the flower, then spirits were the bees. Muhin explained that when his spiritual energy transferred to Senju, it brought with it a scent that wasn't there before. So, what would the bee do naturally? It would follow the flower. This meant that a whole swarm could gather around him. Senju wondered why it had to be him. Surely there were plenty of other flowers around. Then he thought, if they had known the exact answer, his brother and sister might not have died. Muhin likened spirits to Venus flytraps that lure their prey with their scent. He explained that very few exorcists could detect their energy in Muhin's family. Only he and his mother had this ability, which was why they hunted them. It was remarkable that Senju could sense the energy too, even from such a distance, that Muhin himself hadn't felt it. Muhin said that typically, it takes about 3 days for yin energy to strengthen, about the same amount of time the association needs to track spirits. He added that this gave him something to think about. He asked how Senju had managed to sense the spirit earlier. Muhin touched Senju's hand and asked if he felt anything. Senju noticed how cold his hands were, as though he were touching a talisman. Muhin said his hand temperature hadn't changed. He speculated that the reason was that Senju was an empty vessel. Normally bodies are born with chi energy. But since Senju was born empty, he instinctively reached for external energy, making him acutely sensitive to spirits. Senju thought about how much time he'd spent with Mirjan, but didn't recall anything like this happening. Muhin said it was still unusual and brought up the day Senju got drunk. Senju suggested they not talk about it now. Muhin speculated that Senju hadn't experienced this before because he had never absorbed so much energy. But as soon as his spiritual vision opened, his senses became sharper. Senju realized that he had a craving he hadn't been aware of and had unconsciously suppressed. He asked what he should do now. Muhin told him not to worry. Once his spiritual vision closed, everything would return to normal. Until then, he should stick close to Muhin. Muhin instructed him to inform him immediately if anything strange happened. Even if it seemed insignificant, even if it just seemed like his imagination, Senju thought Muhin was scaring him. Especially since the first time he smelled the scent, he hadn't thought much of it. It was difficult for him, and he didn't want to trouble anyone with trivial matters, but when it turned out to be something serious, it only caused more concern. He thought it was better to address such situations early, though things didn't always go as planned. He told Muhin he understood. Senju believed that the root of all his problems was alcohol, and decided that he should quit drinking. Muhin asked if he should lend him some clothes, but Senju said he'd just go home. Muhin asked why and told him to stay after all the bed was big enough. Senju replied that he didn't sleep well. Outside his own home, Muhin pointed out that he didn't have any trouble sleeping last time. Senju thought, here he goes again, wishing Muhin would forget about it. He told Muhin he had university classes tomorrow. Suddenly Muhin approached him from behind and asked how he felt about staying home for a few days. Senju said he didn't want to ruin his attendance record. Muhin asked if they didn't only give unsatisfactory grades after 4 absences. Senju retorted that it didn't mean he could just skip 3 days. Muhin admitted he didn't know much about it, having only finished school himself, and said his car was in the lot, offering to give him a ride. As they got into the car, Senju asked how he had ended up at Muhin's house. Muhin said he carried him on his back. Senju asked if Muhin had carried him all the way on foot. Muhin confirmed it and asked if he shouldn't have. Senju said no, he just couldn't believe Muhin had carried him such a long distance, and asked if it had been difficult. Muhin replied that it hadn't been, it was almost like when they were kids. He told Senju to rest if he was tired. Senju thought about how it was already dark if exorcists worked at night. When did Muhin find time to sleep, considering he escorted him both mornings and evenings? Suddenly Senju asked Muhin about his job. Muhin said he'd drop him off and head to the association. Senju asked when his spiritual energy would run out. Muhin said it would happen in about a week. Senju calculated that it was Tuesday and skipping 3 days. He wouldn't hurt his overall attendance too much. He decided he'd stay home until the end of the week. He thought about how on shorter class days, Muhin wouldn't even have a chance to sleep properly. Muhin suggested it would be better for Senju to rest at his place. Senju asked why wasn't his own home safe enough. Muhin said that in terms of safety, his home was unmatched in the entire country. Even exorcists found it breathtaking, he admitted. He wanted to monitor Senju's physical condition. Although he had work tonight, he thought it would be best if Senju stayed with him until his spiritual energy ran out. Senju said he appreciated the concern, but assured him he was fine, and didn't want to make his parents worry unnecessarily. Muhin said they didn't mind as long as Senju was with him. Muhin added that he had already spoken to them today, and told them that Senju had fallen asleep after drinking. Senju wondered if he couldn't have come up with a better excuse. Muhin said, if Senju was taking a break out of fear, so be it, but if he was doing it out of concern for him, then it wasn't necessary to sacrifice his attendance for his sake. He added that a few sleepless nights wouldn't kill him, so Senju shouldn't worry. Senju thought Muhin was far too clever. Muhin stepped out of the car and asked Senju what he had decided. Senju says that Muhin always does whatever he pleases. He adds that he's ridiculously persistent. Senju thinks that since Muhin said he could handle it, there's no point in arguing further. Outside his house, Senju thanks him for his help and for giving him a ride. Muhin tells him to take care and says they'll see each other tomorrow. It feels strange for Senju to hear such words from him. Muhin usually says something like, all right, to see you inside. For some reason this fleeting goodbye touched something deep within him. Just hearing Muhin say goodbye differently caused his heart to tighten. The following days blurred together, passing without any major events. Each morning, Muhin drove him to university. Senju immersed himself in his studies, but felt a fleeting irritation after class, when Muhin kept waiting for him by the gates. Yet those identical days, walking side by side under the spring sun, became some of his most cherished memories. Monday, Senju feels nothing, no cold, no pressure from outside. His spiritual energy has faded. Senju wonders if he should tell Muhin not to come anymore. He thinks it's better to meet him one last time, just in case, and take the opportunity to thank him for everything he's done. Muhin wishes him a good weekend, before disappearing from his life once more. There will be no more goodbyes. If that hint at future meetings, it's time to return to ordinary life. So what's the point in feeling disappointed now? During a lecture, the professor wraps up, wishing everyone a pleasant lunch. Senju's friend complains that he's starving, and that Monday mornings are the hardest on the way out. The friend suggests they eat at the cafeteria today, saying it's time to save some money. Another guy remarks that it might also be time for the friend to quit smoking. Suddenly, a guy from the business administration department, named Fun John, approaches Senju and asks for his number. Everyone around starts whispering about what just happened. Senju asks why he's creating an awkward situation, and says he could have just asked Mirjan for his number. Van John explains that he tried, but Mirjan was asleep. Van John wonders aloud what Mirjan was doing to still be asleep. Van John was a former classmate of Senju's, and like his neighbors, he plans to become an exorcist after graduation, thanks to his abilities. However, as before, Van John talks more with Mirjan than with Senju, so even though they're in the same university, they rarely speak. Senju gives him his number and asks why he needs it. Van John asks what time Senju's lectures end. Senju says around 3. Senju then says his own lectures end at 4 and asks Van John to wait for him. Senju asks why, and Vanjon says he'll walk him home. Senju asks why again, wondering since when they became friends. He points out that their homes are in completely different directions, and asks why Vanjon is going to such trouble. Vanjon explains that Muen asked him to do it. He says Muhin told him to wait at the university so Senju wouldn't leave on his own and that he'd get in touch later. Senju's friend asks if he knows Havan. John Senju says they went to the same school. The friend asks if that means they're friends. Senju asks if it looked like they were friends when he gave him his number. The friend asks why Fan John suddenly needed him then, and why he's insisting on walking him home. Senju doesn't know how to explain or where to start, even if he begins talking about spiritual energy, and everything else would they even understand. So June asks if this is the same Heion they saw before, the one with the neck tattoo. Senju says, whatever they're imagining, it's not true. He tells them to stop making a big deal out of nothing, and just eat. He himself wouldn't mind asking Muhin what his reasoning was. Muhin didn't come personally, and even sent Funjon to escort him. Couldn't he have at least given him a heads up? Senju decides he'll have to ask Vonjon directly. He's not thrilled about it, but at least he'll learn something. Senju realizes he didn't get Vonjon's number. He thinks Vonjon could have at least sent him a polite text. How could they make plans without contacting him? Until the end of class, did he forget? Senju waits outside in the cold, thinking he could already be home by now. Why wait an hour just to walk for another 30 minutes with someone? If he took the bus, he could be home in 10 minutes. And without spiritual energy, there's no real need for this. He could contact Muhin directly and ask him, but what would he even say? Why didn't he come himself? Why didn't he reach out? Did he know Senju's spiritual vision would disappear and decide not to come because of that? Or why doesn't he take responsibility? If it's his fault, it wouldn't be hard to come up with an excuse to call, but he doesn't want to reveal his foolish thoughts. After all, he's not a child. He decides to just wait and meet Havan. John, he figures. Fan John is probably in the business building, considering his department. Someone seems to be watching him. He wonders when the class will end, and feels the cold creeping in, wishing he could find a warm spot. Suddenly a stranger approaches and asks if he's Senju. Senju wonders who this guy is, and when he became so popular. He asks who the stranger is thinking. He doesn't look like a scammer, but why would he know his name? Out of nowhere, the stranger asks for Senju's number. Senju thinks, who is this idiot is today? Some kind of special occasion. Did this comedian take inspiration from Fan Jun to mess with me? He asks the stranger what he wants. The guy says he just wants to be friends. The stranger pulls out his phone and asks for his number again. Senju thinks he must be a lunatic, and decides to leave before anything crazy happens. As Senju walks away, the stranger chases after him, asking where he's going, and reminding him he asked for his number. Senju asks who said he'd give it to him. The stranger asks why not. Senju, now angry, asks if he's seriously asking that, and what he even wants from him. Senju says he doesn't even know him, asks who would give their number to a random stranger, and demands to know how he learned his name. The stranger falls silent, and Senju notes that his expression doesn't seem entirely human. Despite this, he still feels it's best not to engage with him. All he wants now is for the stranger to leave him alone. The stranger asks him to stop, but suddenly, Senju feels that strange sensation again. He wonders if the stranger is a spirit. Senju remembers that his spiritual energy is gone, but pulls out his talisman anyway. He thinks a spirit can't just appear out of nowhere. The stranger notices Senju's unease and asks, what's wrong? Senju observes that the stranger's expression is oddly lifeless. Unsure of what to do, he wonders if he should call Muhin. Suddenly his phone rings, and he answers quickly on the other end. Van John asks where he is. Senju says he's outside the humanities building for the first time in his life. He feels genuinely relieved to hear from Van John. He remembers that Van John is also an exorcist, and thinks his arrival might resolve the situation. He tells him there's a spirit nearby at these words. The spirit suddenly disappears. Von John approaches Senju, noticing his bewildered expression, and asks what's wrong. Senju explains that he just encountered a spirit. Von John asks if he's feeling unwell. Senju replies that he might be hallucinating. Fan John asks if he's ever seen spirits like this before. Senju tries to explain everything. He debates how to tell him that he saw spirits, thanks to his spiritual vision. Instead, he tells Van John to forget what he said, thinking that if he explained everything, Van John would figure out how he gained spiritual energy. Senju tells Havon John that if he takes someone's number, he should at least send a text. Van John asks how else he was supposed to get in touch. Van John asks what he meant when he mentioned the spirit. Senju asks why he's suddenly interested now. He explains that a stranger approached him earlier, asking for his number, and his expression seemed lifeless. He tried to get away, but the stranger disappeared without a trace while they were talking on the phone. Fun John asks if he gave the stranger his number. Senju asks if he would have done that in his place. Avenger remarks that spirits usually don't appear at this time, but even if they did, Senju wouldn't be able to see them. Senju thinks Fanjon's calm tone makes him instinctively want to believe him. Senju hopes he never sees that stranger again, as Fanjon walks Senju home. Senju asks what exactly Muhin requested of him. Fanjon explains that Muhin asked him to escort Senju home and make sure he was all right. Fanjon adds that Muhin wanted to ask Mugen to do it, but since Mugen was asleep, he stepped in. That's why he asked if Senju wasn't feeling well earlier. Senju realizes that Muhin didn't tell him anything. Beyond that, of course, he wouldn't go into details, but why did he ask Fanjon to do it? He could have come himself. Suddenly Fanjon asks if Senju didn't know that Muhin was injured during his last job. Senju can't believe it. Hunting spirits is dangerous, but Muhin usually doesn't make mistakes. Fanjon says Muhin couldn't come personally, so he asked them to step in. Senju asks if it's that serious. Fanjon says he doesn't know the details, only that Muhin apparently fell from a cliff, but Mujon said he was fine. Senju thinks. No one could be fine after falling from such a height. Do exorcists have a different definition of the word, not a single word from Muin all morning? And now this, Avon John suggests that if he's worried, he should call Muin logically if Muin were seriously injured. Mugen wouldn't have been calmly sleeping until noon, and Senju would have been informed still. He wants to see with his own eyes that Muhin is all right. He stands outside Muhin's house, feeling uneasy. He came here, but getting inside is another matter. The security is far too strict. It's his second time here. But he doesn't remember how he entered the first time. Leaving just like that isn't an option. He decides to call Muhin once, and if he doesn't pick up, he'll leave. Maybe Muhin is sleeping. Senju thinks he'll hang up after a few more rings, but suddenly he hears a response. Senju thinks that Muhin's voice sounds tired. It usually has a different tone. When Muhin realizes it's Senju, his tone immediately shifts back to its usual warmth. Senju says he's here, standing in front of his house. As he stands at Muhin's apartment door, Senju wonders if it would be better to just turn around and leave. He hopes that even if he sees with his own eyes how serious Muhin's injuries are, it won't affect him too deeply. When Muhin opens the door, Senju apologizes for coming without warning. Muhin says it doesn't matter and asks if he's alone. Senju recalls that Muhin even assigned Hovanjon to him and wonders if he's upset that he came unaccompanied. He tells Muhin that his spiritual vision is gone. Muhin looks at him and confirms that it truly is. Senju realizes that the man he saw earlier, it wasn't a spirit, but a person, though this doesn't make him feel any better. Muhin suggests they start by coming inside, and takes his hand. Senju wonders why Muhin is so impulsive. Today he thinks he hadn't planned on staying long. He feels the warmth of Muhin's hands. They were cold before, so perhaps the spiritual energy really has disappeared. Senju mentions that he noticed Muhin is injured. He sees a bandage on Muhin's arm. Muhin asks if Hovanjon told him about it. Judging by Muhin's expression, Senju thinks he hadn't planned on mentioning it. Senju asks if it's serious. Moen says it's just a dislocated shoulder and reassures him not to worry. He adjusted it quickly, and the bandage is just for precaution. Senju knows that exorcists are far more resilient than ordinary people. Even a broken bone heals in just a week. No wonder everyone thinks he's fine. Muhin asks if Senju was worried about him. He strokes Senju's cheek, and Senju admits that he was worried and came to check on him. Senju thinks Muhin looks so sleepy and relaxed, as if he'd accept anything Senju might say. Senju feels like Muhin might pull some kind of trick, any moment, and decides it's time to leave. He tells Muhin that if he's all right, he'll head out and that Muhin should get some rest. Muhin grabs his hand and asks if he's leaving already. Senju says there's no reason for him to stay any longer. Suddenly Muhin asks him to stay for dinner. Senju says he's not hungry, but Muhin insists. Muhin asks him to spend a little time with his Hyun. Now Muhin is preparing dinner. In the end, Senju decides to stay for the meal. Senju says he'll just eat and leave. Muhin asks what they'll do after dinner, and jokes that they still have ice cream waiting. Senju asks how Muhin even has ice cream. Considering he doesn't eat sweets, Muhin says he bought it just for him. Senju thinks Muhin is acting like a child, and that he should just go to bed. Muhin calls him to the table. Senju thinks he'll eat and leave immediately afterward. Looking at the food, Senju comments that Muhin is a really good cook. Muhin thanks him for the compliment. Muhin adds that after all he's been living on his own for 10 years after dinner. Senju notices that it's already close to 9:00, he says. It's time for him to leave, but Muhin says he'll walk him home. Senju says it's unnecessary since he lives close by. Muhin replies that it's late and dangerous outside, and if possible, it's better not to walk alone. Senju points out that he managed to get to university on his own in the morning suddenly. Muhin apologizes. Muhin says, in that case Senju has two choices, either stay the night, or let him walk him home. He hands Senju his coat and asks where he plans to go without it. Outside, Senju asks if Muhin gets injured often. Muhin says, not really, otherwise he wouldn't still be an exorcist. He explains that a lack of sleep and the strain of using a talisman extensively took their toll. Senju asks how many days he'd been working. Muhin says he started on Friday, so about 3 days he needed to seal a spirit before it grew stronger. But no matter how much he searched, he couldn't find it. Senju tells him he should get some sleep, and asks if he's still working tonight. From Muhin's smile, Senju can tell that he is. He wonders what an exhausted man with an injured arm plans to do. His head begins to spin. Senju had been feeling uneasy all morning. First, he learned about Muhin's injury, and now he's walking him home. Senju says that last time, he sensed something even Muhin didn't detect. He wonders if he might be able to attract the spirit. Muhin asks if he's suggesting using himself as bait. Senju says that's not exactly what he meant, but adds that it doesn't matter. Normally he wouldn't suggest it. But today Muhin looks especially tired. He says he hopes Muhin catches the spirit quickly, so he can finally rest. Senju wants to ask him something, but before he can, Muhin kisses him. Senju thinks that the New Year's kiss had been different. He had never kissed like this before, or dared to try even the day he woke up in Muhin's bed. He hadn't imagined such a kiss from him. He feels something strange in his stomach, and notices he's cold. Muhin thanks him for the offer, but says that if he truly wants to help, he'll need to do it every day. Senju wonders if they kissed like this the last time he blacked out. Muhin tells him to just look at himself, and asks what good it would do. He tells Senju to go home, and says goodbye until tomorrow. Senju thinks he doesn't even know if he'll be able to sleep peacefully tonight. That night he has a dream. It takes place in a familiar apartment. He's there with Muhin. He wants to say something to him, but immediately forgets what it was. Muhin asks why Senju addresses him that way. In his thoughts, he asks him to call him Hyun. Senju asks why. He's pretending not to remember what happened between them. Muhin replies that it wasn't a kiss. Senju wonders why not only had it been a kiss, but it was unmistakable. He laughs and asks what else it could have been. Muhin says he couldn't possibly do such a thing with their Senju. Senju asks if he's sure about that and kisses Muhin. In the morning, Senju wakes up, startled from the dream. He can't figure out what the dream meant, or why he and Muhin were doing such things. He thinks it would have been better to keep living in ignorance. Why do memories long buried in the depths of his mind resurface? As Muhin once said, memory is like a chain. Even a small hint of the past can unleash a flood of recollections. Like a breached dam, sometimes even memories you wish to forget forever come rushing back. Yet an experience so vivid is impossible to erase. Why couldn't he see the dream through to the end? He spent the whole night tossing and turning, and as a result, he nearly overslept outside. Muen greets him and asks if he slept well. Judging by Senju's silence, Muen concludes that he probably didn't. Senju asks who's to blame for that, thinking that Muhin seems to have forgotten yesterday. Senju asks if he caught the spirit. Muhin says, not yet. Senju tells him to put in more effort. Muhin says he's so kind for supporting his Yon. Senju thinks this isn't support. He meant that Muhin should handle it himself. Muhin says he won't disappear for the entire week again. He adds that he hopes Senju isn't upset. Senju asks if he seems upset. Muhin says not at all, and Senju wonders why he even asked. Senju says he's not upset. Though he thinks his past self might have been, he feels like that kiss meant rejection. Senju reflects on how Muhin walks him to university. Even though it's close, and how he wouldn't let him go out alone at night, he asks if there's anything he can do to help. He wonders if Muhin has guessed his intention to offer himself as bait. It's easy to see how it might look that way, but the decision was deliberate. He dislikes getting hurt or taking risks in moments of danger. Muhin is always by his side. That's why he's confident that nothing will happen to him. Bait. He wishes it didn't sound so frightening. But he hadn't expected such a rejection from Muhin. He thinks, damn it, who's really suffering from lack of sleep here? Me or Muhin? Once Senju makes a decision, no one can talk him out of it. At the cafeteria, his friend suggests Senju take just a couple of drags from his cigarette before they leave. He says they have time before the next lecture. Senju tells him to smoke and come back. He's going ahead. His friend says that Senju has no sense of loyalty. Senju tells him to drop the topic and says they'll see each other in the lecture hall. He thinks Jin is a good guy, but he smokes way too much. That's why Muhin can smell it even from a distance. He recalls that his next class is in the humanities building. Suddenly, a stranger approaches him. Senju wonders if it's that same spirit-like guy. He thinks, was he waiting for me? The guy greets him. Senju realizes that the stranger isn't a spirit. Though he does resemble one, he doesn't reply to the greeting and the guy repeats, hello. Senju asks what he wants from him and why he's here. Again, he thinks you can't just walk up to a stranger and say, hi. The guy says it's polite to respond to greetings. Senju thinks it would be better if the guy didn't act as though he lacked common sense because he clearly does.